Good evening. This is the Wine of Life podcast. I haven't been doing it for a while, or about a week or so, but now I have some time. We're going to continue on with what we were doing with Ecclesiastes. We did chapters 1 through 3, two or three episodes ago. We're going to do 4 through 6 now. So what we're going to focus on here are three main subjects that are brought up within Ecclesiastes 4 through 6. The very first subject is going to be oppression. And a lot of these things are quite relevant to today and things that we're actually thinking about quite a lot. The second subject, which is another serious question that we're talking about today, is wealth. So when we think about the current situation that's going on around the world, wealth and what does wealth do for us, and are people who are wealthy, should they be considered inherently evil? Is wealth a good thing or not? The third one is satisfaction. How, in what way can we find satisfaction? Or is there any way to be satisfied? Is that even something that we should be pursuing? And there are three questions that come up from this. Number one, for who am I toiling? What is the point of my work? If I'm here to work and this is what I have to do, and I have to work in order to eat, why am I doing it? Is there any reward for the toiling that I'm doing? Number two, what advantage is wisdom? Is there any point in trying to gain wisdom from the world that we live in? And number three, I think this is a particularly important question, is what is good? What is good for man? How do we know that what we're doing is good merely a subjective idea? And so this will obviously pull on several things. For one, it deals with power dynamics, and power is a major question in our culture today. And secondly, it deals with things that happen after you die. How do we view how we're supposed to live in light of the things that are going to happen after we die, since we have essentially no power in dealing with that? So if we try and change the world right now as we are, when we die, is the changes that we made to this world at this time going to matter? Because after we die, somebody could completely upend everything that we wanted to achieve. So we're going to start with chapter 4. And when we read in chapter 4, is that oppression itself is everywhere. And we find this very, not depressive type of viewpoint, but I think a realistic viewpoint. He says, "So I returned, and I considered all of the oppressions that are done under the sun, and behold, the tears of such as were oppressed, and they had no comforter. And on the side of their oppressors there was power, but they had no comforter. Wherefore I praise the dead which are already dead more than the living which are yet alive. Yea, better is he than both they which has not yet been, who has not seen the evil work that is done under the sun." So he's saying people who have never been born are in fact better off than people who are dead, and the people who are dead are in fact better off than the people who are still alive, because oppression is everywhere. It is unstoppable, and there is no comforter for the oppressed. And this is a pretty dark perspective, but I think in terms of being under the sun, we're talking about a sort of a godless type of place, a godless ideology. There isn't really a comforter. There's nothing to come back on. If you don't have that sort of transcendent morality to make some sort of claim for justice, you are alone. It's just you, and there's nothing to say about the people who are oppressing you. It's even very difficult to define what oppression is in a completely naturalistic, under-the-sun type of ideology. So then he asked the question in 4 through 8, who am I toiling for? What is the point of what I'm doing? And that brings us up to our first question. He says, "Again, I consider all travail and every right work, that for this a man is envied of his neighbor. This is also vanity and vexation of spirit. The fool folds his hands together and eats his own flesh." That's the lazy. "Better is a handful with quietness than both the hands full with travail and vexation of spirit. And then I returned, and I saw vanity under the sun. There is one alone, and there is not a second. Yea, he has neither child nor brother. Yet is there no end of all his labor, neither is his eye satisfied with riches. Neither saith he, for whom do I labor, and bereave my soul of good? This is also vanity, yea, it is a sore travail. So people who are trying, who basically neglect every other part of life, they neglect all of their relationships in order to seek after riches, which he says are pointless. And we get through 9 through 12, and he says two are better than one. It's better to be together with people. And then he points out where an origin of wisdom can come from. And he says this in 13 through 16, better is a poor and a wise child than an old and foolish king who will no more be admonished. For out of prison he comes to reign, whereas also he that is born in his kingdom becomes poor. I considered all the living which walk under the sun, but the second child that shall stand up in his stead. There is no end of all the people, even of all that has been done before them. They also that come after shall not rejoice in him. Surely this also is vanity and vexation of spirit. So even the starting point of where wisdom might come from, it can come from the poor, it can come from the rich, it doesn't matter. People will forget either way. And this will lead into the question regarding what advantage at all is wisdom when we get into chapter 6. But in chapter 5, he changes his tone here. And he brings up the fact of the necessity of fearing God. And so there is some sort of answer here that even though there's a rejection of the things that are happening in this world with regards to not being able to fight oppression, not really caring where wisdom might come from because everything is bad under the sun, and what is the point of any of the endeavors that we undertake. In chapter 5, he then deals with the fact that we ought to fear God. He says, keep thy foot when thou goest to the house of God, and be more ready to hear than to give the sacrifice of fools, for they consider not that they do evil. Be not rash with thy mouth, and let not thy heart be hasty to utter anything before God, for God is in heaven, and thou upon earth. Therefore let thy words be few. For a dream comes through the multitude of business, and a fool's voice is known by multitude of words. And when thou vowest a vow unto God, defer not to pay it, for he has no pleasure in fools. Pay that which thou hast vowed. Better is it that thou should not vow than thou should vow and not pay. Suffer not thy mouth to cause thy flesh to sin, neither say thou before the angel that it was an error. Wherefore should God be angry at thy voice, and destroy the work of thine hands? For in the multitude of dreams and many words there are also divers vanities, but fear thou God. So, and Christ brings this up, don't let your yea be yea and your nay be nay. The idea of being honest, because everything that you're saying, you're saying it before God. And so the idea of, even though all of these things are happening, bad things that are happening, fear God. There's a need to fear God with regards to what your duty is to him. And what we're going to talk about that later when we get to the end. And we're going to bring in a little bit of Kierkegaard's ideas when we get to what the duty of God is supposed to be and what it's supposed to mean. And so he goes off track a little bit with that one, because he starts talking about the need to fear God, because satisfaction can't be found anywhere else. So when we read 8 through 12, he says this: if thou seest the oppression of the poor, and violence, perverting of judgment, and justice in a province, marvel not at the matter. For he that is higher than the highest regards, and there be higher than they. In other words, someone is watching the things that are going on. And even though there may be no hope in that, there is something to the fact that God himself, being the highest of the high, is looking down and regarding these matters. He says, moreover, the profit of the earth is for all. The king himself is served by the field. So there is no power over us outside of God. The field, everything actually provides for everybody. Now, there's people who have more power, and therefore they take into their possession more resources, and they hold that against other people, and they mistreat people, and so on and so forth. And there's a need for some of that, because there's a need for organization in order for societies to flourish and so on. But in the end, there is a God that regards all of these things, whether there be mistreatments or oppressions. He says, he that loves silver shall not be satisfied with silver, nor he that loves abundance with increase. This is also vanity. When goods increase, they are increased that eat them. And what good is there to the owners thereof, saving the beholding of them with their eyes? The sleep of a laboring man is sweet, whether he eats little or much, but the abundance of the rich will not suffer him to sleep. So wealth, and we're going to get further into this because we're almost in chapter 6. In what way can wealth or power or increases of goods actually give you satisfaction? It does not give sleep. It does not give rest to the rich. In fact, it causes more trouble to them. This is not saying that people who are poor are in some better state. Obviously, that's not the case. And the Bible's not advocating for that either. But there is another desire that we have within our souls that is different than just trying to get as much riches and money as possible. There's something else that we need, and ultimately that existential issue can be solved by Christ. That He is the answer to that particular question with regards to what we need, and which the thing that we need ultimately is a relationship. We need relationships, and we need family, which is the necessity of the triune God, the fact that there is a family, and family itself is an eternal aspect. So that is the thing that we need with Christ, and we're called to be one as Christ is one with the Father through the power of the Holy Spirit, if you read John 17 and his intercessory prayer that he gives. But then we'll carry on here. It says in from verse 13 to 17, with regards to keeping money, which hurts you, holding on to money hurts you. It says, there's a sore evil which I have seen under the sun, namely riches kept for the owners thereof to their hurt. But those riches perish by evil travail, and he begets a son, and there is nothing in his hand. As he came forth of his mother's womb naked, shall he return to go as he came, and shall take nothing of his labor which he may carry away in his hand. And this also is a sore evil, that in all points as he came, so shall he go. And what profits has he that has labored for the wind? All his days also he eats in darkness, and he has much sorrow and wrath with his sickness. And this is a problem. I think we have a serious issue with that in our current culture and situation in society, is people who are extraordinarily wealthy keeping those riches for themselves. He's pointing to the fact that the reason they do that is because there's a deeper issue with them. But it causes much larger problems for the rest of the citizenry. He says, but behold, that which I have seen, it is good and comely for one to eat and drink and enjoy the good of all his labor, that he takes under the sun all the days in his life which God gives him for his portion. So again, there's a praise of the things that God gives us in a way that we are supposed to celebrate those things that he gives us. He says, every man also to whom God has given riches and wealth, and has given him power to eat thereof and take his portion and to rejoice in his labor, it is the gift of God. For he shall not much remember the days of his life, because God answers him in the joy of his heart. So if we are grateful, and if we understand that everything that we have is not necessarily of our own making, it's not something that we have completely worked for. That doesn't mean people don't work, but the fact that everything that we have is actually a blessing. And if you look at it from that perspective, you don't struggle with trying to keep up riches for yourself. You don't struggle with things that happened in the past and hold grudges and so on. You can actually move on in joy with your life. So then we get to chapter 6, which is where the last two main questions come up. The question of what advantages wisdom and what can be defined as good for man. He says this, there is an evil which I have seen under the sun, and it is common among men. A man to whom God has given riches, wealth, and honor, so that he wants nothing for his soul, for all he desires, yet God gives him not the power to eat thereof, but a stranger eats it. This is vanity, and it is an evil disease. If a man begets 100 children, and lives many years, that the days of his years be many, and his soul not be filled with good, and also that he has no burial, I say that an untimely birth is better than he, someone who dies in birth. For he comes in with vanity and departs in darkness, and his name shall be covered with darkness. So not being able to enjoy the things that you have, and part of that has to do with your own attitude and your own perspective within your own heart and mind. But moreover, he has not seen the sun, nor known anything. This has more rest than the other. So people who die within the womb, he says, are actually better than those who live and do not enjoy the things that God has given him. He says that, yea, though he lives 1,000 years twice told, yet has he seen no good. Do not all go to one place. So again, we're talking about death, which is a huge aspect of what the preacher is struggling with here. He says, all the labor of man is for his mouth, and yet the appetite is not filled. For what has the wise more than the fool? For what has the poor that knows to walk before the living? And that is the question. What is the point of having wisdom at all? Better is the sight of the eyes than the wandering of the desire. This is also vanity and vexation of spirit. That which has been is named already, and it is known that it is man. Neither may he contend with him that is mightier than he. So those who are wise, even if they're wise, but they don't have the power to exact their wisdom upon the society or the city or wherever they're involved in, their community, what is the point of being wise? You could be wise and still be poor and go through all of these terrible struggles, whereas a fool may be able to enjoy the riches of this world. Now, from a spiritual perspective, we would say that there is something greater even beyond this, and there is also a point of spiritual joy that you can find regardless of the wealth that you have or not. Now, most people don't want to live in dire circumstances. I would say, well, everybody, even though there are some rich people who want to decide to sort of live poorly. But we all want, some sort of safety and security. The goal is how do we achieve that, and how do we achieve that in an appropriate humanitarian type of way. And this is where a lot of resentment and anger has come in, particularly in our culture of late, about the wealthy. The poor have a particular way that they are characterizing the wealthy in our day, and it's difficult now because it's not wrong in and of itself to be wealthy, but it is very difficult to discuss the way the wealthy live and sort of put themselves out and the way they behave, to see that and to find out the ways that they make their money and so on. This is causing a lot of resentment and a lot of anger. And so what is the point of having wisdom? And people are struggling with that question. What does it matter if I have wisdom? What does it matter if I try to do good? It ultimately doesn't matter. And so this leads to things like violence. And we want to not have that. If we're going to have a successful society at all, those are things that we need to try and stay away from. But then we move on to verse 10 through 12, the end and the last question. It says, that which has been is named already, and it is known that it is man. Neither may he contend with him that is mightier than he. So power does matter. A power dynamic does matter. Seeing there be many things that increase vanity, what is man the better? What is good ultimately? For who knows what is good for man in this life, all the days of his vain life, which he spends as a shadow? For who can tell a man what shall be after him under the sun? So all of the things that you might try and do, it won't matter, because when you die, it may be all swept away. And this is pertinent whether you believe Solomon wrote Ecclesiastes or not. After Solomon, the kingdom was split in two. And so it's like the level of irony here. The things that he's struggling with directly speak to that. And the same later with later kings, where they lost, I think it was King, was it Pekah in Israel that lost Israel? We also see Zedekiah was the last king. His eyes were put out. His children were killed in front of him. He lost everything. So were his actions acceptable during that time? Did he enjoy all of the wealth that he was able to have? Did he enjoy being king for all of that time just to lose the entire king? He ruined the whole of the city. Even though God's judgment was prophesied many years prior. Nevertheless, what is the point of good? What can we even call good? And even when we try to perform good, what does it matter? Because when we die, somebody else is going to basically uproot that and destroy it. So it doesn't really matter. So I think that the issue is trying to lay down some sort of legacy. And I think from a biblical perspective, while preachers or teachers or people who are part of congregations might not lay down a legacy for the community they end up that they're living in, or the country they're living in, because things might not go well. They can lay down a legacy for the church that they're a part of and the congregation they're a part of, because they can leave a spiritual legacy and example to those in a way that presented themselves as someone who was a true ambassador of Christ, which is what our goal is in the first place. Our fear of God is to ensure that we are allowing ourselves to be changed by God within into the image of God, right? We're being changed glory to glory, according to 2 Corinthians 3. So we're trying to be more and more Christ-like as we move forward. The beginning of wisdom is supposed to be the fear of the Lord. So fearing God is the way that we become more and more Christ-like. It's a part of our sanctification, a part of our salvation as well. So that would be the closest thing to an answer that one could give. How do we define good outside of God, or in the way that he's describing here, under the sun? How do we describe good within a particular society that is outside of God? I don't think you can. I think a complete secular form of an ideology is godlessness, which means lack of good. It also can mean lack of evil. It means nothing, essentially. There's a nothingness to it because everything is leveled out. There's a flattening of it. And so what is good can be evil one day. What is evil can be good the next. It doesn't really make any difference. And the same with wisdom. Wisdom can't really go anywhere. But if you live in a society that values the transcendent, I think wisdom itself can lead you into better places. You can actually improve your particular circumstance, and I think we've attempted to do that in our country. But as we move slowly and slowly away, or maybe quicker as we move it faster, away from even the notion of a transcendent, not even just talking about the triune God, but completely leaving out the transcendent altogether, then we're going to see more and more problems, more and more struggles between the rich and the poor, more and more questions being asked about what is supposed to be wisdom, more and more questions about what is actually good and what is evil, and how are those things defined. Because some people who are playing these sort of power dynamics now allows one side, say the working group, or the working class, the proletariat, to perform acts of violence against the wealthy, while at the same time the wealthy are in their own way performing their own acts of violence against the poor. So there's struggles going on in our country and in our society and all over the world, and this is something that these questions and these issues predate us by thousands and thousands of years. So that is 4 through 6. We're going to move on later. We're going to go 7 through 10, and then we're going to do an 11 through 12. And we're also going to have just like we did with Nietzsche, we're going to have a Kierkegaardian question about the duty of God that he discusses in his two problems that he outlines in Fear and Trembling. So if you like the video, hit like. If you didn't, let me know in the comments, and subscribe if you want. But we'll talk to you next time. Bye.